Hello and welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm excited to be here today with Lindsay McGregor, who's been on the show before. It's been a couple years, though. Lindsay is the author of Primed to Perform, and she's the co-founder and CEO of Vega Factor. Lindsay, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So, Lindsay, I know your firm works on helping your clients, retain your best performers and improve the performance of others. But I'm not sure if I'm characterizing it perfectly. Why don't we start? But just give me an overview of your firm.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are obsessed with how do you build a high-performing organization? And in the research that we've done, we've found that the highest performing organizations motivate people in a particular way. They really unlock play and purpose and potential for the problem they're solving. And our firm looks at how do you design a company that way? So we train leaders on how to be inspirational, high-performing leaders. We consult for the organizations on how to design their operating models, because often the way you do goal setting and strategy and budgeting is the opposite of motivational and effective. And we build tools that let organizations and other consultants implement this work for themselves.
Amazing. I want to maybe dive a little bit into that play, purpose, and potential. Talk to me about play.
So I'll tell you a story. We were working with one of the top three hedge funds in the world. And the founder, the word play was not in his natural vocabulary. Let's just say he is a more stereotypical, tough Wall Street type of person. And but one of his executives asked him to meet with us. And we asked him, you're worth many, many, many billions of dollars. Why didn't you retire 20 years ago? And he said, well, because it's fun. And he talked about the puzzle of the game of every day is a new puzzle, is a new challenge, how he always is thinking about what his strategy should be and what everybody else's strategy was going to be. You could see that his brain was just absolutely fascinated by this puzzle. And that's play. Play is that feeling of you're interested, you're curious, you're solving a puzzle, you're experimenting, you're in flow. And when we measured the play, as well as the other motives of his portfolio managers, we found that for every point of play, it was worth millions and millions of dollars to them every year. So play, we often think of it as what we do during our hobbies. But if you think about any time at work where you've just really felt engaged by what you're solving, that's when you're performing at your best. And organizations can surprisingly do a lot to crush your play or bring it up.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let's get to the next level of detail. Talk to me about some of the tools that your firm has developed and maybe walk me through a sample engagement. There might not be a typical engagement, but a sample engagement of how you'd engage with the client.
Yeah, I'll tell it through a story. We met with the CEO of a really fast growing tech company, and she had scaled really, really rapidly and was looking for answers on, she used to be able to hold her whole company together herself. She was a personality that inspired other people. She was able to be involved in the work, and so she could always quality control or improve the work. But her organization had grown so fast that now she didn't know everybody and she couldn't see every work product. And we see these very natural breaking points when organizations, all the systems that they used to manage themselves previously start to break down. So if you think about, if you have a span of control of 8 people, if you're a 9-person company, that's fine. It's easy. It's one team leader. It's one leader. But then as you grow to about 20 people and about 140 and about 1,000 and about 9,000, each of those breakpoints are when you add another layer of management to your organization. And so all of the routines and the systems that you use to run your company now suddenly break because you have a whole new level of people. And she was hitting one of those inflection points where all the routines didn't work anymore. So she had read our book, Primed to Perform. One of her board members had sent it to her, and we sat down for lunch. And she was sharing some of the challenges that she faced that we hear a lot right now. So one was she felt like she had some really exceptionally talented people, but didn't know how to scale them. Like she had people who are great strategic thinkers and great problem solvers, but and you get this a lot. A lot of CEOs say there's like 5 people or 10 people that are my go-to people that do everything in my company. Like, how do I free up their time so they can do more? And how do I make more of those go-to people? So she wanted to figure out how to scale those people. She also knew that her people were at risk of burning out because they were growing so fast. And this is really common right now. There was a recent survey that said that 77% of people are experiencing burnout in their jobs, and that 84% of leaders feel at fault for employee burnout. So that was a big risk for her. She really wanted to watch out for that. And then another big theme that we're hearing a lot from leaders is she didn't think her organization was adopting AI fast enough. And she believed that there were some areas where they would adopt AI, like AI could help them with their common customer service requests, like it could automate all these answers. But she didn't feel yet like AI was changing the day-to-day life of her leaders and her people. And that's an area we've been spending a lot of time is how, AI is going to automate all of the tactical work. But what's going to be left for leaders is the adaptive work. And so work is going to get harder, right? It's a lot easier as a manager to manage the tactical, like make sure people follow their checklist or their standard operating procedures. It's a lot harder to manage adaptive performance, creativity and problem solving and innovation. So she was concerned that as her managers' jobs got harder and the expectations got higher, is there a way that AI is going to be helpful to them? Or is this just going to, is this trend going to pass them by as a company? What we found is really, really helpful. We've really been focused over the years on what's the fastest way to transform performance and motivation in a company, because there's hundreds of things you can do. But we found that there's 3 things that are simple, that are easy to implement, and that make a really big difference. And then the first is goal checks. The third is health checks. Sorry, 1, then 2, then 3. The first is goal checks. The second is health checks. And the third is skill checks. And these are just simple quarterly routines that you can run. And when you run them in a way that creates play for the work, you get a lot better outcomes. So I can dive into those if it's helpful.
Yeah, let's go through it. What are goal checks, health checks, and skill checks? How would we help our clients do those?
Yeah. So when companies set goals, I often imagine a company as a basketball team. And imagine if a basketball coach just stood up in front of the team and said, all right, team, I've got the answer. From now on, we're using OKRs. I'm going to tell you how many points to get. This game, we're going to score 103 points. You go figure out the rest. Right? Like that coach would be fired. The goal of the coach's job is not just to say, hey, this game we're going to get 88 points, and next game we're going to get 103 points, and the next game we're going to get 24 points, right?
I'll simplify it, Lindsay. How about if we just say,
Yeah,
all right, the goal is to win. So
yeah,
that's the goal.
exactly.
Go,
And
go
yet,
back.
yeah, this is what we see so many leaders doing at work. And to be sure, figuring out the goal is important for the leaders of a company. They need to figure out what are healthy metrics, or what revenue do I need? What margin do I need? They need to understand these, but that's just one part of the work, right? The second part of the work is to say, okay, what do we believe are the initiatives or that will maximize our results in the quarter or the months to come? I'll share with you a fun experiment. There were researchers who tested 3 different types of goals. One was do your best. The second was increase market share from 7% to 21%. And the third was identify and test 6 different ideas to improve market share. So the first, a do your best goal, a performance goal, and a problem solving goal. And then they looked at which of these goals led to the highest performance. So I shared this experiment on stage last week with the Human Capital Institute and had the audience all vote on which goals would be the highest performing. And then which goals did their organization use the most? And their organizations most used increased market share from 7% to 21%. But if you look at the results, the problem solving goal group performed 48% better than the group that had the performance goal of increased market share from 7% to 21%. 48% better. That's huge. And second, when people were asked about their confidence in solving the goal, the problem solving group had over 300% higher score on their confidence in their ability to solve the work. Therefore, their anxiety and their level, which is a big contributor to burnout, is much, much lower than the groups that have that 7% to 21% goal. So absolutely, your organization needs numbers. And if you need to hit 21%, your organization should know that, but that's not sufficient. The goals that say, okay, we're going to test 6 different ideas to improve market share. That puts you in a problem-solving mindset, in a learning mindset. Your outcomes become much, much greater.
Well, sure. It's hard to necessarily know what to do if you're just giving an outcome related goal. Whereas if you give more of a process or input goal, that's something that someone feels that they have some control over. So in that case, it was also a more creative kind of goal, but it's also something that you have control over.
Yeah.
Something with like a sales team, like you could say, well, sign up 5 new big clients this month. That's hard to necessarily have control over, but you could say, hey, make 100 sales calls per day. And that's something that an individual person can actually go and, do that day. So I guess I, think about for myself and my own teams, I try to focus more on process metrics. And if you get those right, hopefully the results will take care of themselves.
Yeah. So the process metrics, absolutely 100%. And then we also track idea metrics, like how many ideas or experiments are people running. So if you're doing those 100 calls, for example, it might be, let's experiment with 6 new strategies a week to make a connection on that first call. And so, because a lot of people, when you give them an aggressive goal, they'll just work harder. But at some point, effort taps out, right? You're trying as hard as you can, and you have to start working smarter, not harder. And so managing that experimentation on what would we do, how do we work smarter in this scenario is really important. So I'll give you an example from another tech company that we worked with on their quarterly goals. One of their recruiters had to fill double the number of jobs in the coming quarter than she normally did. So normally she filled about 30 a quarter, and she had to fill 60 this quarter. And so her performance goal was fill 60 job openings by the end of the quarter. But the recruiter sat down with her leader and with AI and asked AI, okay, here's my goal for the next quarter, how to create 60 jobs. How might I do that? And what came out was, okay, here's 6 categories that you should think about. For example, 1, how might we increase awareness of the job so that you get more people applying? 2, how might we filter resumes more efficiently? 3, how might we reduce the time it takes to interview so we can get through more candidates? 4, how might we reduce the time it takes a candidate to accept the job? And so they're breaking that, her goal of just create 60 actually became 5 different sub goals that were about working smarter, not harder. And AI then populated those 5 with a set of sample ideas for how to solve all of them. So her and her leader now had this great first draft that they had produced in about 10 seconds and could spend all of their time creatively adapting that. Like, well, actually awareness isn't our problem, but our problem is, these other 4 questions. And this idea is great, but this one's not quite right. But if we did combine this idea and this thing that's unique about our company, the fear this recruiter had of being able to accomplish her goal quickly transformed into play because they were able to build on all of this great structure and these great ideas and come up with really creative, insightful ways to experiment and learn on how to do the job smarter. So that's and that experience for them took, an hour to create the first draft. They thought about it for a few days, did some tweaks, and then were able to implement. So the one of the number one things that we hear in companies is we don't have enough alignment, we don't have enough strategic clarity, we have these aggressive outcome goals, but I'm feeling nervous and anxious and burnt out because I don't know how we're going to accomplish them. And we see that that's like putting in place a goal check on a quarterly basis. That's not just about what outcome are you aiming, but what problems do you need to solve to accomplish that outcome? Basically, how are we going to work smarter, not harder, is really, really transformational.
Fantastic. Let's talk about health checks.
Awesome. So on a quarterly basis, if you start with a goal check, the second thing that we recommend is you check on your team's health. So your team's health is how it works together. And are we working together effectively? What kind of dysfunctions are getting in our way? How do we improve? And we found that in most organizations that this is either skipped or it's done as sometimes it's done as a retro, like, let me tell you all the things you guys did wrong last quarter, which ends up becoming really, people become defensive, like, oh, if you were in my shoes, you would have done the same thing. You don't fully understand the circumstance. Like, that's not what happened. So the backwards looking tends to not be super inspiring. Or what people do to improve the health of their teams is they implement something like a survey that is, let me complain to HR, right? Or let me complain to the executives and tell the executives what they want to fix. And what we found is that the fastest way to increase motivation around team health is to do one meeting where the team is problem solving in a forward looking way. So not criticizing the past but coming up with ideas for what they personally can do in order to work better together. So it increases ownership significantly because it's what the team can own. And in that meeting, what they're doing is they're talking about questions like, how motivated do we feel by the work that's coming up in the next 3 months? Are we expecting to find play and purpose and potential, or are we expecting to find these negative motives like emotional pressure, economic pressure, and inertia, and making it safe to talk about? For example, with one team, one team member said, I feel like I'm feeling a ton of emotional pressure around this new marketing campaign that we're launching. I don't feel very comfortable with it. I think it's high risk, blah, blah, blah. And so you can get ahead of it because another colleague said, oh, like I have a friend who can help with that. I have an expert that I worked with at a past company that can mitigate that risk. People can suddenly are aware of all the worries of their colleagues and coworkers before the work happens, and they can start to address it and fix it. And then it's in that health check talking about, okay, what do we as a group want to prioritize and how we work together? And so we've got a set of areas that teams see a big performance lift if they work on, things like teams saying, oh, we need to be better organized, or we need to apprentice and coach each other better, or we need to create better belonging and team norms, things like that. And your team will identify, what do we want to prioritize? And then what ideas do we have to take that forward? And so the team leads with a really crisp action plan for one thing they're going to change together, at least one thing they're going to change together over the quarter to come to make them work more effectively. And what we find is that doing this team-oriented work on a quarterly basis really increases it just reduces the sense of inertia. Like that feeling like, oh, my team is always going to be like this. My company's always going to be like this. Nothing ever changes. And in some organizations, what we found is that the secret ingredient has been, in some organizations, the teams do it by themselves, but in some, we found that having a skip level leader or somebody more senior join those is actually really powerful because it's enabled senior leaders to help unblock the team. Like they've identified blockers that are outside of the team's control, but that they have the ability to go and influence and fix. So it suddenly feels to the team and the executive like they're on the same side. They understand each other's challenges and they're going to help and going to go fix it. So that's that quarterly health process.
And what about the skill check?
Yeah. So if your goals are about, do I have the right goals, not just the outcome goals, but also the adaptive goals, and health's about how do we work to accomplish those goals, then skill is making sure that your team has the skill to get them done. When we measured motivation in the workforce, one thing was super surprising to us. So we asked thousands and thousands of people um, a whole bunch of questions about their work and their motivation. And one comparison really jumped out, not just one, but one of my favorites was we asked people whether they learn valuable skills on the job and whether they have good work-life balance. And if you have bad work-life balance, and you don't learn new skills, you have so the worst of both worlds. Your motivation's really low at negative 21 on a scale of negative 100 to positive 100. But let's say you add in good like work-life balance, your motivation only moves from negative 21 to negative 8. Like your motivation is still really bad if you don't feel like you're learning at work, even if you have good work-life balance. Then, if you add in learning at work, your motivation, even if you have bad work-life balance, goes up to 34 if you're learning and 46 if you have both good work-life balance and learning. So learning on the job is hugely, hugely motivational. And yet most of us find it very hard to do because we think learning is about going to a big training or taking time off to attend courses. And we haven't found ways to make learning new skills really easy. And it shows in the outcomes, right? Like I think it's 70% of employers don't think their people have the skills they need for their job. And 87% of executives think that their company has massive skill gaps. So skill gaps are huge, and executives recognize it and individuals recognize it about themselves. We're all feeling like we need to grow and improve our skills, but we don't have the time. And if you think about how people used to learn skills, think about before we were all behind our before knowledge work, before many of us were sitting behind computers all day, it was much more common to learn through apprenticeship. So imagine that you wanted to be a woodworker. You would go and become an apprentice for a master woodworker, and you would watch that woodworker, build a chair, and then you would do it with him, and then you would do it yourself, and he would critique you. It was very much a, I do, we do, you do model, right? And you would learn by doing and working on something. Now, some organizations are really well known for this. Like back in the day when I used to work at McKinsey, I was in a team room with 10 people, literally sitting 6 inches away from each other because we were probably working in like the broom closet of a client office, right? And you spend,
I
yeah,
actually worked at a broom closet at a large pharma company. There was brooms. I mean, it was
yes.
all brooms. And
Brooms, and then maybe some, I had some dial-up internet cables at that point.
so that is no joke, no exaggeration. It was a storage
Exactly.
broom closet. In fact, I was a BA on the team, and I think my main contribution to that team, really, my main contribution was about 9:30, 10 o'clock one night when we just started the first week. I had the chutzpah to take like all this extra furniture and I took it up to the sixth floor and I just randomly put it around like the sixth floor because we had no space to work. Team came in the next day, like, oh, cleaned out the room. I think that was probably the most value I added. But so the broom closet is too. But true, McKinsey is best practice for that, and consulting is an apprenticeship craft, as you were
Yeah,
saying when I interrupted.
absolutely. I mean, that's great adaptive performance. I love it. But, I remember learning how to use Excel, and I'm just sitting next to somebody who was very good at Excel. And so, they would lean over every, 20 minutes or something when I had a question and help me figure out how to do it differently. And then I would show them I'm stuck and I would watch them learn how to do it. And so you were never doing your work alone. It always felt like you had multiple people building a slide or doing research or building an Excel model together while you were learning. Once you had the skill, then you would do things more independently, but you didn't feel like you were ever going to be stuck nobody was going to let you be unproductive for very long. Um, and that's really missing in a lot of companies. And it's gotten worse with a remote work culture. And so remote work culture can be great and there's lots of benefits to it, but you have to be a lot more intentional in how you build skills. So what we found around a skill check is that, once a quarter after your team has its goals, an individual sits down with their manager and they have a conversation together. And we start with play and purpose and potential, right? Play is what do you enjoy, what do you enjoy learning? What do you want to learn? Potential is your career, right? Where do you want to go eventually and long term? What's your career aspirations? And purpose is really about the impact that you're going to have. Like, okay, what impact do you want to have this quarter? What are your goals this quarter? What do you want to accomplish? And then through that, you identify, okay, what skills that person is going to grow that quarter, that they can really practice on the job through the course of their day-to-day work. And with AI, you can now actually just type those, we've typed those answers in. We have a library of, 150 skills. It'll take your answers, match it to the skills that you might be interested in learning, and then actually share, okay, if I go back to my recruiter example, you're a recruiter and you want to figure out how to double the capacity of your recruits. Like, why don't you think about the skills of managing projects for a group? It'll be helpful in this way. Or why don't you think about the skill of planning behavioral change? It'll be helpful in this way. And here are 10 sample experiments for how you could learn in the course of your day-to-day work. And that's the key. You don't have to use AI for this, but it helps. It's really thinking through what are the experiments that you could run in your day-to-day work to build the skill, and who can you apprentice with to do that? So, for example, this might be a front-end designer that I worked with, a front-end engineer really wanted to learn design skills because he believed that if he understood more about design, he would be a better front-end engineer. And so he identified with his manager several pieces of work coming up that were heavy in new design decisions, and decided he was going to co-work and get on Zoom a few times a week for 20 minutes with the designer to start collaborating on this project rather than working solo, to build his design skills. And he interviewed a few designers to understand what they felt like were the best skills for him to work on, given his role and his context. He shadowed. He found learning resources, not against training. So he did attend some trainings. I'm finding that TikTok lessons are wonderful at PowerPoint design. I don't know how many of you have watched PowerPoint gurus on TikTok, but in 60 seconds or less, you can learn some amazing animations. So he created a really active, proactive, experiment-based plan for how he was going to build a skill through just the course of his day-to-day work. And that is really, really motivating when you can feel like doing your day-to-day job is going to make things different.
You mentioned early on in this discussion that your firm has some resources or tools that consultants might access. Anything related to the goal checks, the health checks, the skill checks, any kind of template or tools or something that folks could go to?
Absolutely. Yeah. So our mission is we just want everybody to work in a high-performing, motivating way before we retire. And so every single year, we're constantly figuring out how do we take what we do and turn it into tools that other people can use. So if you're looking for something and we don't have it now, let us know, because we are very highly motivated to make it. The biggest and most helpful tool that we have right now is a platform called Factor. And in Factor, it enables you to run goal checks, health checks, and skills checks. We do partnerships and we train and we certify consultants to do health checks and skill checks and goal checks with their organizations. So if your listeners are interested in, really running those, we're happy to, some people, we show it to them in like 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and they're good to go. And others are like, oh no, I want to do a training and understand the science and go deep into how to, really facilitate great processes across a whole organization. So we do that too. So yeah, if they go to factor.ai, they will find more information there.
Fantastic. And what's that certification and training process if a listener of the show does this kind of work and wanted to be able to use your platform with their clients? Is there like a fee for the certification or for the training or to, use the platform on a SaaS basis, or just how does that work?
Yeah, we do a 6-part learning session. It's 6 1-hour sessions. It goes deep into how to do all of this. There is a fee for that. Happy to share a link custom to you, to your listeners, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
And it's really just the, I think many of your listeners who are already used to facilitating and thinking about how processes should work and getting the most out of their people, it's quite simple. And what we're really providing to people is tools and processes and AI that's already trained. So we've taken AI and taught it. Here's what a good goal looks like. Here's what a good skill goal looks like. Here's what often goes wrong or dysfunctional in their team health. And so you're getting a sort of co-pilot or a sidekick or an extra facilitator that's already trained with tons of best practices that's that just makes life a whole lot easier, because no matter what, you get a great outcome. Like, you get a great set of goals or a great health diagnostic of what's going wrong in your health, or a great set of skill experiments. And it really frees you up as the consultant or the leader to take a good starting point and make it great.
I'd like to hear a bit about how you help your clients retain the top performers. You mentioned that that was one of the things that you
Yeah.
do. Just talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah. Often that is those high performers feel like they're in meetings all day, every day, and that every fire drill comes to them, every special initiative comes to them, the hardest problems to crack come to them. They they and they feel a deep sense of ownership over solving the company's problems, and so those things can weigh heavily on them. What we found is the fastest So one ways to help them, one is putting in place good processes in a company so that there are fewer fire drills, right? So what we've already talked about with, if your whole organization has great goals, the point where you don't just know what outcomes they're aiming for, but you have pretty good confidence that you know what everybody's working on and that it makes sense. That goes a long way to getting rid of some of those fire drills in the first place. The second thing that we found is making it really um, easy for those high performers to problem solve with the teams around them. And so one of our most popular trainings is how to solve problems cross-functionally, cross-functional collaboration. We have a CEO who puts it really well. One of our clients, he says, if one function is supposed to solve a problem, it goes well almost 100% of the time. If two functions are supposed to solve a problem together, it goes well 80% of the time. And if three functions have to solve a problem together, like, you might as well toss a coin or not even. And the high performers are often the people that are working on those problems that cross functions. And so making cross-functional collaboration and problem solving easy is one of the biggest ways to improve their jobs. One is that you teach the organization a common problem solving process. So a process that begins with, really appreciating the problem and understanding the root causes of the problem through ideation and decision making, et cetera. So simple frameworks where you really teach people about identifying the root cause of a problem and ideating expansively before you get to a single recommendation or a single decision. Second is making it very easy for that high performer to problem solve. And so and that's literally getting them out of meetings. So what we do with a lot of leaders is we set up in Factor, our software, a much better asynchronous process of problem solving. So every team you can see on their board or their workspace, here's the 5 or 6 big problems they're solving. You can see the ideas that they're considering to solve them. And that's where the teams have the discussion and the problem solving conversation around how to solve those problems. And what that does is it means that leaders, instead of attending a 1-hour meeting to solve a problem, they're able to quickly read the problem-solving comments, and we find that their average time in solving the problem goes down from that 1 hour meeting to that 10-minute conversation. One of the leaders that we work with, he used to work at, I forget which big consulting firm he was at, but he now runs a 300 person operations department. And he said that this way of asynchronous problem solving brought depth, breadth, and lightness to his job. He's like, I can go deeper into the problems. I can see more I can go deeper into the problem solving. I can get exposure to more problem solving across my organization. And I'm spending significantly less time in meetings and at work every week. And that was true for him and his teams. So it's a little bit hard to explain verbally. I have to show you a bit more, but it's basically like taking the chaos of problem solving in Slack or in Google Comments and turning it into a much more structured problem solving process, like what you would have experienced at McKinsey, where you have an issue tree, like it's all broken down. You have all your conversations around, how do you solve each prong of that issue tree? And it makes problem solving fun again. Like it gets you out of all those boring meetings where everybody's talking forever and lets you just really focus on cracking the difficult stuff at your company.
Are there things that companies have to do that are different to retain high performers versus retaining other employees? Or another way of asking that is, do high performing talent, do they want something different than your average employee?
Yeah, so the high performers, what we find is that they really want to get good work done. And the more bureaucratic you are, the longer it takes them to have impact, the more dysfunction they have to deal with, the more likely they are to leave. Whereas your non-high performers are more likely to stay through because your non-high performers have become kind of given up that work can have play and purpose and potential. And so they're looking for the best, they're more likely to stay because of the perks, right? Because you've got the free lunch or this, certain benefit or this nice sparkling water. So you'll see that, especially when we look at motivation across generations, we see that the youngest generation is more skeptical than ever that work can be engaging, that it can be meaningful, that it can be worthwhile. And so they're more likely to see it as simply a transactional decision where they want to find a way they want to find a job which will give them the maximum pay and benefits for the minimum time where they can leave as quickly as possible. Like it's something to get to do and then finish and get out of. But when you look at people's ability to experience play and purpose and potential, that is universal. That doesn't change by your generation. It's just that the younger generations right now are more skeptical that you can find that at work. And so you'll see that your high performers know that work can be meaningful and important and impactful. And so you've got to get all of the barriers out of the way. Whereas for those that are feeling like, I just need to, I'm going to clock in and I'm going to clock out as soon as I can. For those, you actually have to spend some time helping people realize that play and purpose and potential is possible. And so we'll often start with workforces where there's a lot of demotivation. We'll start with usually talks about play and purpose and potential and what motivates people, and then share with them examples of what can be motivating at work, and then give their team leaders exercises that they can do in huddles to help their team start to experiment and learn and play at work. And everybody's super skeptical in the beginning, but it doesn't take long for people to realize like, oh, my 9 to 5 can be miserable, or it can actually be kind of interesting. Let's do the kind of interesting stuff. And then it begins a virtuous spiral where it gets better and better and better.
How do you measure motivation? You mentioned your negative
Yeah.
100 to positive 100 point score. Do you just ask people what's your level of motivation, or is there something more sophisticated?
Yeah. So what we found in our research is that motivation is that there's 6 different types of motivation. That motivation is a spectrum, and that it ranges from when you're working because the work itself motivates you, to something completely disconnected from the work motivates you. So play is when you're inspired by the work itself. Purpose is when you're inspired by the outcome of the work. Potential is when you're inspired by an eventual outcome of the work. Like, you might be a teacher, and play is you love teaching the kids, and purpose is you like the moment when the kid reads a word for the first time. And potential is this job is a really good stepping stone for me to be a principal one day. If we move even further right, play, purpose, potential are all about the work, but then you get to things that are not connected to the work. So, like emotional pressure is when you're doing something because of guilt or FOMO or peer pressure. Like, I'm a teacher because my mom was a teacher and my grandma was a teacher, and they'd be really disappointed if I wasn't a teacher. Economic pressure is when you're doing something for the reward, or to avoid a punishment. Like, if I don't get this test score, my kids are going to lose their budget. Or if I don't file this report, I'm going to get yelled at, where you feel like manipulated by the system, like you're just doing something because of a punishment or a reward. And then there's inertia, which is you have no idea why you're doing it, right? You're just doing it because you've always done it. And these motives are very distinct points on a spectrum. They've been studied by over 50 years in a field of research called self-determination theory. And we were able to measure these motives across thousands of people and hundreds of companies. And that data is now featured in the preeminent textbook in the field around self-determination theory. So I think we have the largest collection of data on this in the corporate world, ever. And when we measured all of these motives, what we were able to find is that play and purpose and potential drive adaptive performance up, and those negative motivators drive adaptive performance down. So if you want creativity and innovation and all of this other great stuff, you have to create this play, purpose, potential world. We have 6 simple questions you can use to measure it. They're available in, I'll share an article that we have in the Harvard Business Review that has them. They're in our book, Prime to Perform. And then our latest questions that we've are in Factor.ai, our platform, in this health check, where we ask people about the work coming up. And we ask them, the play question is around, how is the upcoming 3 months feeling really interesting, or is it feeling boring? And the emotional question, pressure question is, are the next 3 months feeling really unsustainably stressful? Or are they feeling like intense, but in a good way? Like you're fired up, it matters. And so with simple questions, you can actually gain a huge insight into how motivated people are and what's motivating them.
You mentioned a couple times that your firm's research. Just tell us a little bit about the nature of that.
Yeah, so our whole journey started with research. We wanted to figure out what makes a high-performing company and culture, because this was, back in probably 2012, 13, 14, and the years leading up to 2015. We wanted to understand what makes a high-performing culture. And a lot of what was out there was about just copying what other companies did. At the time, it was more copy what GE does. But now we all know what GE did, right? That wasn't very effective. And then it became copy what Google does, which is great if you print money, right? And you can afford to give everybody, 3 meals a day and dry cleaning and everything else. But we were also skeptical, like, were the high performers really motivated by the dry cleaning, or what's going on? And so we wanted to figure out, is there a way to build a high performing culture that is quantitative, that is deductive, that you could engineer with? And so we measured hundreds of different factors from psychology and business best practice across thousands and thousands of people and hundreds of companies. So we would go out, for example, and get we had a market research firm go and find hundreds of people that worked at Home Depot versus Lowe's and ask them questions, or at United Airlines versus Delta versus American Airlines, et cetera. And just look at, okay, how are employees from these companies answering all of these questions differently? And it was fascinating, because you would have companies that were almost identical, like Home Depot and Lowe's, where the employee answers were very, very, very different. And then we would ask them in in the surveys as well questions about how their systems operated, like what kind of performance management systems are you using, how is your leader behaving, um, all this different stuff, and then start to look at all of the connections between the two.
And
Then after, yeah.
that was done
Hmm?
with the collaboration of those companies like Home Depot and Lowe's with
No, no.
okay.
So this was like, through market research firms that have huge panels of people that answer their surveys, that find people like this in the, parking lot of the mall. It's very interesting because we do have some companies where we got the external data and the internal data. So we measured this company externally, and then later we worked with the company and we did an internal survey. And when we found that when the survey was administered internally by the company, there's a consistent like 20% increase in positivity, which we believe occurs because people don't trust the anonymity of their survey, that they need to be more positive. So it's very interesting when the survey is sponsored by an external party as opposed to the company itself.
That's interesting to me that you were able to get people willing to like give a
Yeah.
survey, survey answers to, oh yeah, this is like how well our systems work at Home Depot when they work at Home Depot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that must have been challenging to find people who are willing to fill out a survey about that.
Yep. Yeah.
Fantastic. So, I am looking at your website and there's a ton of information there. There's some kind of screenshots, a live sort of interactive thing of your Factor tool, and tips around implementation. There's links to download research. So that would be at factor.ai, right? So, um, Lindsay, this was hugely informative discussion, helpful tips around like these three things, goal checks, health checks, and skill checks. Thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me, Will. Pleasure to be here.